next panel is called Education and Storytelling. And I would like to introduce Dr. Marvin Opiyo, and also I'll introduce shortly our two people who are going to have a conversation with them as well. So Marvin Opiyo is an educator and storyteller. He writes about immigration, and his new book, Stuck Here, African Immigrants Tell Their Stories, he shares fascinating and heart-wrenching accounts from years of his diligent research. The process of immigration is one which marks a crucial turning point in one's life. Although one leaves one's home country, he or she or they does not leave behind the traditions, languages, experiences, and values. Dr. Opiyo holds a doctoral degree in education from La Sierra University, Riverside, as well as a bachelor's degree in literature and English from Kenyatta University in Nairobi. And he will be accompanied by Professor Bill Hing. As all you know, Professor Bill Hing is a professor both in the School of Law and the Master's in Migration Studies, and also USF Law JD candidate Linda Ravano will also join the conversation. So welcome, and we're looking forward to hearing more about storytelling with all of you.
Thank you very much, Karina. Before we turn over to Dr. Opiyo, I just wanted to point out that I came across his book a while back, and I read an excellent review of it, and he was very gracious to share a copy with me. And it's that's the primary topic of our conversation today, is the content of his book. And so I want to acknowledge the hard work that he put into that effort. And in order to start the conversation, I'm actually going to turn it over to my law student, Linda Ravano, who has been with me for a solid 2 years. She's about to graduate and pass the bar and become an excellent lawyer. And so she's a native of San Francisco. She's a mother. She's busy. She's active. She's got a giant dog that comes to class with her often. But Linda, why don't you kick it off with Dr. Opiyo?
Hi, thank you, Professor Hing. Hi, Dr. Opiyo. I was really excited to read your book, and I have it right here, Stuck Here. And yeah, Stuck Here, African Immigrants Tell Their Stories. And it came out last year, January. And I found it really fascinating because I haven't seen a book that interviews African immigrants before. Can you give us a little bit of a brief introduction about yourself and why you wrote the book?
Right. Thank you, Dr. Hing and Linda and Karina and everyone for inviting me. I feel very honored to be part of this very grand occasion. And thank you to Dr. Pastor for the great presentation, which I appreciate. I can identify with you in some ways. Right now, I teach high school. I teach at Heritage High School in Menifee. And I can identify with you because you are able to cross the barrier to do research and do presentations about Black people, even though you probably are not necessarily Black. So where I teach, I am currently the teacher of the month. So I am honored to hold that position for this 1 month. That's my moment of fame. And part of the citation was because I advise the kids, especially the African American kids, but not just that. I have written so many letters of recommendations to Hispanic students to get scholarships that the body that offers the scholarship invited me to be one of the panelists who read the applications and make recommendations as to who gets a scholarship and who doesn't. And I think they started thinking that I was Hispanic myself, which I'm not. And also, I am the advisor of the Asian Culture Club. So I try to be multicultural, and so in that context, I can identify with Dr. Pastor. Now, coming to my book, I am an African immigrant myself. And so there are some issues that are coming across my mind, periodically. And I wanted to understand myself in a way. So I said, why don't I interview other fellow immigrants from Africa to see what it is like for them when it comes to these issues. And yeah, so that's how my book came about. I interviewed several subjects to find out why they're here. The one question was, what am I doing here? Several thousand miles away from Kenya. And so I wanted to find out, what are you doing here? How come you came to the United States or to California or to whichever state you are? It started with people in California, but then it spread out. So I interviewed people from all over the African continent and also all over the United States. And I was pleasantly surprised when Dr. Hing reached out and said, I'd like to read a copy of your book. And then I thought he had forgotten about it, but then he sent another email and said, I'd like you to join this panel, this occasion today. So that's why I'm here. And I will be happy to have a conversation with you, maybe to answer some questions that you may have.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, little technical difficulty. Thank you for that. Yeah, so I really was at first didn't understand the title until I read the book, Stuck Here. And I really think it's something I don't think people ponder, when people immigrate to the United States, like everybody has, we think it's for good. Back in the early 1900s, most people didn't want to go back, but a lot of your interviewees came here for graduate degrees or education and had the idea to go back to their home country to help out and try and just go back home and live there. But the idea of being stuck in the United States for many reasons, there was political strife back home and a lack of opportunity, but also when they had children, they wanted to stay in the United States because their children wouldn't necessarily, if they were assimilated here or were born here, would not do well or have opportunities back in their home country. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Right. Well, you've summarized it very well. I'm glad you read it very well. So yes, Stuck Here was never on my mind as a possible title. But after interviewing several people, I would say that at least 3 subjects said, I'm stuck here. And another one said, I'm stuck here. And another one said it. So I started thinking, how about Stuck Here as a possible title? And when I gave it to the person who was helping with the editing, she said, that is the title. When we presented 3 possible titles to the publisher, he said, that's the one we go by. And it sounds controversial. And so far I have received some feedback from some readers, and only one of them has said, I don't feel stuck here. I'm here by choice and I want to be here. But for the majority of the people, they say, one of them said, you stole my title. That's the one I should have written about, because she was thinking of writing a book herself about immigrants. So most Africans come here, or many Africans come here to go to school, like you have said, and intend to go back home to to 3 years, maybe 5 years at most. But then you realize that there are circumstances, and these circumstances are socioeconomic, sometimes political, that make people feel that they are stuck here, they can't go back. So the general feeling is that if you look even at the cover, the idea is that the body is here, but the mind and heart is at home in Africa. And it's because of these socioeconomic issues that people are not able to return as they had planned to. One of them that you have mentioned is when children come along and you finish your studies, and then, like my son asked me, now that you're planning to go back home, you came here to go to school, but how about us? And that happens to many people. And then to another level, somebody said, if now these children are also going to school, when they're done, they get married and grandchildren come, then you want to be close to them. And so then you end up not going back home. And some people find difficulty raising tuition. So it takes longer to go to school than they had expected. And then you get into legal problems with the immigration officials, because I think it was a requirement that you had to, if you're in graduate school, you had to take at least 9 credit hours every quarter. And that costs a lot of money. So if you have to work and raise the money, it's challenging. If you have to get the money from home, the exchange rate is not favorable. And so that causes the program to take longer than it was supposed to take. And some people, unfortunately, may even drop out of school. Yes. What was the third one that you mentioned? Those who are here for political reasons?
Yeah, that a couple, well, I think also a big theme was brain drain. And so
right,
people expect to go back, but there's maybe not opportunity due to political strife, or you mentioned a lot, if there was corruption in government, and so there weren't opportunities, and if people spoke out, they were
exactly
sent away.
Exactly. So there are at least, you'll find at least 2 subjects who are here primarily because of that. One of them had come to go to school here earlier on, and he finished, and that day he finished, he graduated. He went to the airport in his graduation gown to go back home and serve. But he ended up coming back because of the same thing you're saying, that political persecution. And another one went to school in Kenya, finished, was doing his medical practice, dental practice, but he wanted to argue for better treatment of university professors and Kenyans in general, and it didn't go well with the government, so he was forced to flee the country also. And you know, these are just a few people, but they're representative of the realities on the ground at that time. Now, I must say that Kenya has changed a lot right now. There's more tolerance of differing political views, but back then it was very bad.
Thank you. Yeah, and I mean, there were a few people that were particularly inspiring to me. I was wondering if you had any of the interviewees that you were inspired by in particular.
Right. It's difficult to pick unless you want to say, especially in what category, because there are those who came to go to school, and then those who are here for political persecution or as refugees. And those who are stuck here because of socioeconomic issues and all that. So,
Well, one was Laura, who was a single mom of 5 children, and I think she represented maybe what's going on now with, she faced kind of both racial and sexual discrimination when she was here. And she mentioned that she felt she had to work twice as hard as her white counterparts to get the same position.
Exactly. Yes, and it's quite remarkable that she made it to the very top of her career, a very determined lady. And yes, so she fits in that category and speaks for many people like herself, because she's one of those who tried to go back home to serve there. And if you go back to serve, you expect to bring some expertise that you want to share to help to develop the system. But it was not accepted. So she had to come back. She tried to go back twice and it didn't work. So she had to come back and settle here. And there are many other people like that. There is the pathologist who also went back to serve. And the one who's, we said, you're on your second missionary journey because the system totally broke down and he could not function as a pathologist, lacking basic needs like water. And when he asks for water, they would tell him, you are lucky you have a bucket of water. We don't have any. So, and it is not that Africa is that poor that there is no water. There is a lot of water, and there's a lot of capable human resources. You can see most of the Africans who are here, like the ones I've seen and interacted with, they are very successful in their fields, but they are not able to use their expertise to develop our countries. And that is why we need a change in the system so that people can use their knowledge to improve lives for everybody.
So do you see that happening in any countries in particular, that it is changing? Or, I mean, it's the first speaker mentioned of today mentioned the resilience of African immigrants here and their hope to succeed both here and helping at home.
Right. Yes, I see some hope for change. Like I have said, in Kenya in particular, the government now is tolerant to criticism. There's a lot of tolerance in social media now. Social media is helping also. The Chief Justice was complaining about criticism, and the president laughed at him and said, "Welcome to the club. We are dealing with that every day." That is something that you could not do just not too long ago, maybe 10, 15 years ago. That it was not possible to criticize the leadership, especially the presidency. But now you can, and there's a lot of it going on. And they are also responsive to that criticism. For example, yesterday I was reading in social media how gas prices were going up, and people are complaining and saying that the gas price is up because of taxation, excessive taxation. 2/3 of the gas price goes to the government as tax. Only 1/3 is actually the price for gas. And people complained because they were about to hike it again. And so they stopped because of the complaints that in the past that could not have been possible. In Malawi and Zambia, I think we have had, and Ghana in particular, we have had successful elections that brought in new governments, new leadership that was peaceful and accepted. And in Nigeria, I think for the first time ever, not too long ago, a sitting president was defeated and he left office peacefully and was replaced. So that is a sign to me that there is hope that things are changing for the better.
Yeah, I mean, and I think right now is a great time for this book to come out because we are having the discussions around racism. And I know a lot of the, you mentioned, or actually in the foreword, it was by Ngugi wa Thiong'o of your book, he mentioned that colonialism played a large part in the brain drain that happened, and resources from Africa were taken away. And so maybe that's why this has not, it's not been so successful, and there have been infrastructure issues. And yeah, so what do you think about that in terms of the future of reconstructing? Do you hope to go back to Kenya, or are you happy as in the US with your family? Because I know that people did say, a lot of people expressed the fact that they have a good life here in terms of having a home, but then their heart, as you said, is in their home country with their families, their extended families. And one mentioned like it takes a village, which is a very used phrase, but that came from Africa, the close family system, and that's lacking here for many people.
Right. Like most of my subjects, I feel stuck here with my body and my family here, but my heart being there. So that is a very difficult question to answer. My wife and I were discussing this issue every day, all the time. For example, she wants me to go build a house at home. And I say, okay, are you going to live in it? And she never answers that question because it's difficult to answer. So I'm asking, are you going to live in it so we can determine how much to spend on it or how big it is to be? And that is very difficult to answer because you feel like, okay, I want to go there and contribute to the development and all that. But on the other hand, if you look at a few people who have done the same thing and gone back there to do the same thing, and they ended up coming back, like the pathologist. When he told me he was going to go back the third time, his wife laughed and said, okay, you go, we will come and visit you. And he hasn't gone yet. So I want to be very realistic and say, yes, my heart longs to do that, but the realities of it are very challenging. Makes everybody feels stuck here.
Well, you did mention, or I'm not sure who mentioned it in which source, but that there is, it's complex because when people live here and they do well financially, then they're able to send money back, which helps the economy. But then on the other hand, it would be better to have the people who are well educated to be at home in Africa and help develop the countries more. Do you face that, or did you find that true with most of the sources that you interviewed?
Right, with many of them, yes. So I did research. I did mention that myself in one of the chapters, when especially with reference to the Asian tigers and all that. The people who came here from India, Korea, Japan are the same ones, and even China, they're the same ones who went back to start their economies, to get the economies going. I think China is now a very competitive economy. In Japan is a great story of success. And India now is coming up, is the next big thing, if not already there. If you look at major, even American companies, especially the technology companies, Many of them, their CEOs are from India. They have Indian background. They're from, Asian background. And now these people have gone back to Asia and helped. They got the knowledge and the resources they had here to go back and start their businesses there and help to improve the countries. But first of all, the key thing is to have the political environment that allows for this kind of thing to happen. And I am encouraged, like I have said before, I'm seeing this happening. In that book, towards the end, I think there is the story of Seshi University, where the gentleman who used to have a senior position in Microsoft, he went back to Ghana and started a university. And the major goal is to have the graduates of that university focus on ethical leadership so that when they take over, then we make sure that we have the political environment that will support development. And I think that is a very promising thing. I have seen in Kenyan social media groups, there are people who are already doing this in Kenya also, using resources here. Just the other day, this week, we were talking about the money being remitted to Kenya from people in diaspora like myself, and it is in the billions of shillings. It's a significant portion of the GDP of the country. So yes, that is one way that people in diaspora can help, and we are doing it already. So yes, the brain drain is there. It's in one of the references that I was reading, the brain drain is there as a problem initially. It drains the brains that we need for development, but in the long term, it turns out to be what they call brain drain. So that the train is going back, it's going a full cycle, going back to help develop the countries back there.
Dr. Opiyo, what I'd like to do is I'd like to bring in a couple of other people into the conversation. Adobo, I wonder if you would mind, what I'd like to ask you is, what is your reaction to some of the conversation that Dr. Opiyo has raised with respect to things like brain drain and the idea of stuck here? I guess I want to know what your reaction is to those concepts, but also what, if you were to interview some of your clients, what kind of stories for a book, what kind of stories might you be giving voice to in terms of the experiences of your clients, Adobo?
Yes, thank you, Professor Hing, and thank you, Dr. Opiyo. It's really, this is a very important topic. And this is what I was saying, in my remarks. We really need to sit back and think about who we are, where we've been coming from, where we are, and where do we want to go. And I was just thinking about our communities of the immigrants. And one day I was listening to KQED, and I think a state senator who's original from China was saying, oh, when we first came, we came with a dream of going back. And several generations after, we are Americans. And Dr. Opiyo, can you foresee something like this, happening with African immigrants? That's going to be my first question.
Right. So that was an issue for me when we first came. When somebody referred to my children as Americans, it was almost offensive. But as we stay here longer and look at the situation, at the facts, you realize that it is something that you come to accept in spite of yourself. So our children, and that is one of the issues that I was going to talk about, the challenges facing African parents. You come here and try to raise your children the way you were raised, or the way you understand, the way you know how. But then you realize that you are raising American children. And so if you don't make that shift, then it becomes a big problem. And yes, so you are right in the sense that we would like to see ourselves as Africans, but we are at crossroads. There is a transition into becoming African Americans, like it or not. I don't know what Hamid would say. I suppose you are my neighbor up north in Somalia, northeast.
Yeah, yeah. Hamida, what do you think of this conversation with respect to Somalia and also Kenya, which I know you've been there?
Yeah, I am of Somali ethnicity, but born and raised in Kenya, actually. So a fellow compatriot in that way. But I do think, yes, there is a conversation to be had about the double consciousness that a lot of African migrants and refugees have when they come either to the United States, as well as the general conversation about global migration. And I do think there is somewhat of a clash, a new form of, I would say, generational as well as intergenerational trauma and disconnection that happens. You're no longer in Africa, therefore not African. But then at the same time, when you're in the United States, you're walking into both racial and ethnic hierarchies that distinctly highlight your separation from the native communities here. And I do think it depends on how people navigate that. It might be easier for students like me to say, I'm going to go back home one day, but there are a lot of African immigrants and that live here and see their future basically rooted and founded here, that have to navigate these spaces that are very difficult and honestly are can produce traumatic experiences. So I think understanding that mental aspect of it and that double consciousness that it will probably continue to exist, and raising the concern about mental well-being of African immigrants, especially in the United States, and saying we need better integration models. We need to understand the variations within cultures and ethnicities and religions of the communities that are arriving here. And yeah, so it's very different. It's very difficult as well to navigate. And I do think there is a decent effort being made by both, especially African youth, in addressing these issues and saying, we are both, you don't have to pick a side.
Mm-hmm. So maybe I can narrate one of something that one of the subjects has done, that when he retired, he sold his medical practice, and he bought a house in South Africa. And so he lives there most of the time, but when it is cold there, when it is winter there, he also saved his house here, and he comes and lives here in the summer. And then when winter is over there, he goes back there. So that is a trend that I'm seeing some people doing. They live in both worlds. So it comes back to the same topic of my book, Stuck Here, where your heart and mind is at home, your body is here, back and forth.
Yeah, and I would like to just come back to a theme that I know always came back in mostly English speaking African literature. It was the myth of the being two, right?
Yeah.
People are getting back out of colonization, and there was still the myth about the colonizer, and it was the whole thing to go overseas and see, who these people are from. I mean, where these people are from, how do they act there? And today, whether, we can't deny that, when you go back home from abroad, people listen to you in a very different way. People look up to you, in a very different way. And how does this myth still weighs in some people's desire, to go back, because, I want to go back with this privilege, quote unquote. This privilege of the one, who's been to, and of course, the name been to, for those people. I mean, do you think that plays also, in how we act here and how we definitely want to go back?
Been to.
Whoops, I think Dr. Opiyo, go ahead. Go ahead, Dr. Opiyo. I think. Whoops, you're on mute. You're on mute. Yeah, we lost you for a second. Go ahead.
I got disconnected for a moment. I don't know what happened.
Uh-oh, somebody must be listening to us. They don't want to hear what you're saying.
I guess so, yes. There are some people who are very sensitive up to now, based on how the government's acted back home. They still believe that people are listening to our conversation. Even when I was interviewing them, they would, that was a concern. But anyway, Bintu was a negative terminology at that time. I think it appears in Achebe's writing.
Yeah.
They were referring to people who are going back with airs of superiority, and so it was derogatory. I would say the people back home are equally conflicted, because my brother just the other day was writing in a larger family forum saying we need people who are people of the diaspora. We now need you to return home. We need more of you to return home. And my other brother had come to visit here, and he said, don't come back home, stay right here. So there is that conflict also. There is, like with everything, the good sides of it and the negative sides of it.
So if I may add something is because there's definitely an issue, and it can be really traumatizing, to be shared, between two worlds. And so this is something that we got to learn how to live with. And when it's just not a guilt, for not having been back, for so long, and how do we help, heal? Because we need, because this is a burden. How do we heal this kind of, heal from this kind of guilt, which is actually part of human nature? Human beings have been moving all over the world, since the beginning of times. And so what is happening, is nothing new. And whether we like it or not, some of our community, some of us will never go back. They may just go back on vacation, but at some point they're going to be convinced that, hey, my life is here. I'm an American and I don't feel guilty about it. That's, for believers, they're going to say that's the way God has chosen for me, for believers. So now, but yet there's this sense of guilt, with which, quite a certain number of people live. And how do we help address that? How do we open the conversation about that?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So one of the subjects was outright, clear about that from the beginning, that he came here by choice. And when he was here with his parents as a teenager going to high school, he knew that he was going to come back here and work here. That was his goal from the beginning. For them, and one reader also has told me the same thing, that he came here by choice and he has no apologies to make for it. For the majority of the subjects and African readers, they feel stuck here and they'd like to go home, but they realize that it's not practically possible or easy. So I think we can do what our predecessors have done. Like I was saying earlier, those from Asia, some of them have returned to start their economy. Some of them have stayed here. The world has become a very global, we live in a global community today. So travel now, I think, is even, without COVID, it would be still much easier than it was 10, 20 years ago. And I think we might as well just accept the fact that we will live in two worlds, and there is nothing wrong with it.
So I'm gonna finish with maybe yeah, I'm just want to mention a conversation I had with a young man. He didn't know me. He saw me somewhere, and out of the group he came up and talked to me. I don't know, for whatever reason, maybe because I'm so tall. And then so he said, "Hey, I'm from Africa," and I think he said, "I'm from Uganda, and I've been here. I've been going to school. And how do you think I should live here? Because I really want to go back one day." And my answer to him was, live here as if you will never go back. Do everything you got to do. Get your education, do everything. And then you're going to realize that, when the time comes for you, to go back, you're going to be more ready. You're going to be more ready than many other people who've been thinking about it, every single day. And that's really takes me back to what kind of choices do we make? How do you explain that someone, who's got the legal studies, who's got the education, and who's even overqualified sometimes, and yet he would never be a policeman. He would be a security guard, because he's thinking that day by day he can make money really quick and go back. And yet he would realize later that what I'm making as a security guard will never take me, will never allow me to do what I want to do. So going back, I'm kind of stuck here, right? Because of, the wage, my wage. And so what I'm looking at isn't this idea of going back really impeding our integration? Because when I look around, I want to see us on the police force. I want to see us among the firemen. I want to see us when I go to a Social Security Administration office. I want to see us when I go to a asylum office. I want to see us when I'm watching the news, among the newscasters, among the reporters. I want to see us everywhere. And I think that, those who are quote unquote made it are people that you see everywhere. And that kind of also speaks, to the success and being highly educated. And this is something nobody denies, but how can we really have this conversation? I know that it's some kind of personal choice, but yet it's also, it has an impact on a community, on our community at large. Now, how do we really sit down and openly talk about these things, the choices that we're making, not just for ourselves, but, also, as members of a given community that needs to thrive together.
Thank you. I really appreciate what you are doing, to build community, because building community is always very helpful. My wife always says, and I agree with her, that whether someone, an immigrant from Africa, succeeds or fails, how well they do or how poorly they do, depends on the African community they come into. And I think Dr. Hing mentioned that earlier on with talking with Hamida, that it depends on where you first go, the people you find there who also came from Africa. And building that community is key to that. So if you find people who are progressive, like in my case, I came here and I found a group of Africans who have houses and they live in a house. And I was like, wow, somebody owns a house here. And the houses are expensive here. So, and then you go to another person's house, and we form a community of an African church, which was started by people who came to go to school, most of whom have settled here. I think that played a big role in the direction I have gone myself and many other people. There were some other people who went some other place where people were doing, let's say I'm a school teacher now, and somebody told me when I first came here, you cannot, don't even think you're going to get a teaching job here. Forget about your teaching. You have to do the jobs we are doing. So what jobs were they doing? They were cleaning up toilets in the school and all that. And actually, I did that for a few months. And then I saw my friend who was always nicely dressed in the morning, and he would come back at 2 or 3 driving a car and he's nicely dressed. So I asked him, what do you do? Where do you always go in the morning? And he said, oh, I do substitute teaching. Tell me more about it. So he told me more about it, and I got into the system, and I was being begged to teach. I teach English. I was being begged to teach English in Southern California. Now I felt very flattered. And they said, you're the only English teacher we have in our sub pool, so can you please stay? The kids need you. We need you. So that was because I shifted from the group that was telling me you can't do this, you can't do that, to a group that was telling me there is this and that option. Yeah. And so that is building a community where you land determines how much success you'll have. I should have mentioned at the beginning when I was asked to introduce myself that I'm also the founding chairman of KAA, which is Kenyan American Association. We started this with a group of friends who, when somebody lost his father at home and he didn't have the money to go, and so we raised funds and said, now we want to start an association to have the money ready, so if somebody has to go, we don't raise funds, we already have it. And it has grown into a big thing now. So things like that, building a community, thinking as a group, how can we benefit ourselves when we are here? How can we benefit our people back home? And how can we do it together? That is very important and is key to success.
Yeah, Dr. Opiyo, thank you very much. We're almost at time, but Linda, were there any chat questions that you wanted to raise?
Well, there were, I mean, several.
You want to pick one?
Okay. Well, is brain drain still an issue in most African countries? This is from Anga Miesi from the Cote d'Ivoire. And Anga said, isn't the issue the political and economic climate back home the main impediment to going back?
Yes, it is. It is still a big problem. The political climate still is, like I said, it is improving in many countries, but it still has ways to go. And so the short answer is yes, that statement is true. But let's say if that political climate was different, was better, then the people there and the people here would have an environment to thrive and make the countries much better. Because in terms of human resource, Africa is not lacking. I was listening to Ambassador Kwaoa. She was former African Union representative in the United States, and she's very well spoken, very articulate, very knowledgeable. And she was saying there are more Ghanaian doctors in New York than there are in Ghana. There are more Nigerian doctors in Los Angeles than in Nigeria, and engineers and everything. So wow, whatever is needed for development, we have it. We just need the environment to be able to apply it.
Right. Hamida, do you have a final question for Dr. Opiyo or point?
Yeah, I think my question would be, is there a way to reconcile for those of us who want to stay here, but then at the same time, hopefully contribute to the development back at home in the spirit of either, nationalism or ethnic belonging or Pan-Africanism? Do you think there's a way to reconcile these two elements?
Right. So like I was giving you the example of my South African friend who lives in both worlds now in his retirement. He runs a children's orphanage there, which is very viable. And also he has his children here, so he comes and visits in the summer and does that. So those, we don't have to wait until retirement. There are people who are establishing businesses as we speak, and using the resources here. Actually, that is addressed in the final chapter of my book, comparing it to, the story of Joseph of the Bible and Moses. So Moses took the people back home to go rebuild, which was okay. Joseph stayed in Egypt and used Pharaoh's resources to build his people. So either one is just fine. It worked for them. And I think you are right, we can do the same.